Okay, calm down. You're getting nervous, man. You're getting nervous, man. Okay, calm down.
And now for my interview with Ken McCarthy on Israel and nuclear weapons and JFK. I think you're pretty anxious to, understandably, because it's so uncovered. Let's. I think you're, what is it, chomping at the bits to talk about the Algeria connection, right?
Well, it explains so much, and yeah. We've kind of given away the hint, but still, everybody should watch this video. Look at it. Right. We're not going to tell you what it is. Yeah. Look at it and try to figure out what it is you're looking at, okay, and then there's a reveal at the end. By the way, that's Jackie Kennedy with little John John. Okay, so just pause it for a second. Yeah, there you go. Pause for 1 second. So everybody should try to guess, what was that? All right, and here's the reveal.
This moment of national independence for the people of Algeria, the creation of a great new state, represents the devoted and courageous work of the Algerian people and their leaders, stretching over many years. I congratulate them. I congratulate them as President of the United States, and I congratulate them on behalf of the American people. We too fought for our own independence also. And it cost us many years of bloodshed and tears and work and perseverance. But we finally obtained our independence as you have yours, and we have maintained it as you will yours. It's a particular source of satisfaction to me to express these words of greeting to our friends in Algeria, because I recall speaking some years ago in the Senate of the United States on behalf of independence for Algeria.
So folks, what you saw, I mean, I want to ask this question. Has anybody ever seen such a lavish reception for anybody at the White House ever?
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
Okay. So what was that, folks? That was October 15th, 1962. That was Ahmed Ben Bella. That was the newly elected president of independent Algeria, the first Algerian to be the head of Algeria since the French invaded it in 1830. Okay, so they invaded in 1830, and I want to repeat, they killed 1/3 of all of Algeria in their first wave of invasion. Now, young John F. Kennedy, when he was a senator from Massachusetts, made this, there was a second war of independence that took place from between 54 and 62, in which 400,000 to 1.5 million Algerians were killed, civilians, and they did the typical stuff, bombing villages, burning villages, rounding people up, putting them in the equivalent of concentration camps, destroying their agricultural resources, and it was a drain the swamp military operation. The idea of, hey, we got all these freedom fighters in Algeria that are causing us trouble. Why don't we just destroy the entire civil infrastructure so they can never trouble us again? And by the way, Israel participated in that. They provided intelligence assets, because they knew a lot about the Middle East. They also trained French Jewish fighters and armed them and so on. So Israel was involved in that battle. So young John F. Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, gave a long speech to the Senate saying, this is wrong. We think France should stop. We don't think the United States should support this. This helps nobody. Okay, so I have to say something about Noam Chomsky, and I know this is going to seem like I love him. There'd be no me without him. I mean, he was the guy that was explaining all this stuff in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, before the rest of us figured it out. But I feel he made one terrible error, which was to lump JFK with the rest of the elites. And yeah, on a certain level, that's true. But there's two things different about JFK. He was the only guy in the White House, possibly in history, including Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, who had no financial stake in any direction the United States went in. Okay, George Washington owned a lot of land. Abraham Lincoln was actually an attorney for the railroad companies. That's how he made his money. Nobody ever asked how Abraham Lincoln has made his money, right? Kennedy was the only guy whose father was one of the richest men in the world. And, you know, Joseph Kennedy was he had a vast Democratic Party network. He was the fifth richest man in the United States. He also knew all about myth making in Hollywood because he was one of the most important financiers in Hollywood. He put John F. Kennedy in position. We would not have seen the Kennedy brothers had it not been for Joseph Kennedy. Not that they weren't talented and ambitious. He paved the way. Okay. And those two men were absolutely independent. They looked at the world through the lens of what is right. What is right for America first, which is what they should do because they're Americans. But they also looked at what is right for the entire world. And Kennedy came to the conclusion was all this coup making and assassination and imperialism and putting our heels on the necks of the poor is wrong. And he had this opinion as a young man. There was no political gain for him as a senator from Massachusetts to give a long talk. In fact, it hurt him, right? Because France was our ally. It was the Cold War and everything. He didn't care. He saw what was right and he spoke up for it. So when de Gaulle finally said, we're out, Algeria had a chance to elect a president, and look at what Kennedy did. That is the greatest honor. It was the color guard, and not just 3 guys with a flag, 20 guys from each of the armed forces, all so the generals saluting and everything. And that was a message to the world, but it was also a message to the U.S. military, because Kennedy was a military man and he was very astute. And when you're president, you have to let the troops know what the direction is. So in addition to honoring this man, honoring Algeria, telegraphing to the world that we're out of the coup business, we're out of this, he was also telegraphing to the military, we're not fighting Arab-speaking people. And by the way, you got to say Arab-speaking. When people say Arab, it's ridiculous. It's like saying African, like these countries are different. They're different people.
Arabic speaking, right? Arabic speaking, Arabic speaking people. We are not their enemies. We don't want to be their enemies. We want to be their friends. And we want to be the friend of the impulse to liberty all over the world. We're going to compete. And he said this in various speeches. We're going to compete, and we're going to compete hard, but we're going to compete fair. And Chomsky would say, well, he's a Cold Warrior. And it's true. He was a Cold Warrior. But his way of fighting the Cold War was to let's be better than the Soviets. Let's show a better way. Let's show the best of us. So I'm afraid a lot of the left has written off Kennedy as an unimportant person. But when you see this, and this is just a narrow slice of what he did the same thing in Indochina. He gave unimportant. I wouldn't say unimportant, but not a departure from regular presidential foreign policy.
Gotcha.
Right.
But in
right?
fact,
because they would say he's important, they just basically don't want to get. They would say he doesn't deserve credit for ABC. I mean,
I've heard Chomsky say, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. He's not particularly interested in who killed Kennedy or why, because he's just one of the bunch. But it's not quite accurate. Again, we've just seen this demonstration of Kennedy putting his money where his mouth is, and again, no personal gain for him. There's no Algerian lobbying group that would funnel money to his campaign. He did this to do the right thing. All right. And a year later, he was dead. Okay. So during the summer of 1963, he and his brother, who's the attorney general, were fighting Israel on 2 fronts. One, Kennedy personally, JFK personally, he wrote the letters, or they were signed with his name. He wrote the letters, the telegrams, the cables, and we have all the correspondence, which was classified until just a few years ago, which is really weird. He was telling the Israelis, you cannot have a nuclear weapon, period. End of story. We need to see your labs. We need to see what you're doing. Now, on the brother side, Robert Kennedy, who was Attorney General, was telling the Israeli lobbyist groups, you got to register. just like everybody else. England registers, Canada registers, Australia registers. You've got to register too. And of course, they were using the endless delay tactics. So there was a secret war, and I call it secret. I call it a battle. It was secret because nobody knew about it at the time, and nobody knew about it as recently as the dawn of the 21st century. All right, so it was secret. I'm calling it a battle because it wasn't an all-out war, but it was a battle. It was serious, and each side had a position, and each side was digging in deep. And who was he fighting against? He was fighting against, in my opinion, extremist elements in Israel, which, by the way, I don't know how many people know this. Did you know that Hannah Arendt, and am I pronouncing that right? Sometimes I read things that I don't know how to pronounce. The great sociologist
Arendt,
who spoke against fascism. She and Einstein wrote a letter to the New York Times in the 1940s saying, hey, these Zionist extremists are terrible. We shouldn't.
They even said fascists. Yeah.
Yeah. We should not invite them into our country to speak.
Right.
Now that's something I would bang that drum every day of the week.
Yeah.
So here we are. And of course, Kennedy died. And as soon as he died, his brother was neutered. And who came in? And this is really important. LBJ came in. What do we know about LBJ? We know that one of his dearest family members, his aunt, and everybody, sometimes you love your aunt, you love your uncle because maybe they're nicer to you than your own parents, He had an aunt like that. She was a Christian Zionist.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. And she wasn't any old Christian Zionist. She was a national leader of the Christian Zionist movement. He also had a great friendship. Her name was Matilda Krim. Anybody ever heard that name? Okay, check this out. Arthur Krim was a Hollywood guy, made a ton of money. Like he owned a townhouse in the Upper East Side, and he's one of these super rich guys. And Kennedy got fundraising from him. In fact, there's a famous picture of Kennedy with Marilyn Monroe. There's only one. It was taken place it was taken at Krim's townhouse. So they were close friends. I mean, not close friends. They were alliances, and he raised money. He also raised money for LBJ. His wife, Matilda Krim, had been a member of the Irgun. She was a terrorist. Okay. And now, how close was LBJ to this particular couple? They had a bedroom in the White House that was theirs. That's how often they visited the White House. They were frequent guests at his ranch, and they built a house within the vicinity of his ranch so he could helicopter over to their house when they wanted to hang out. So LBJ was kind of on the Zionist side, I think, and weirdly, this is never talked about. Now, when you hear about who killed JFK, we're allowed to say it's the CIA. We're allowed to say it's organized crime. Lately, the last 10 or 15 years, people are talking about LBJ. In fact, there are several books that say LBJ was the man that put it all together, which is nonsense. But he certainly had to be involved for it to be pulled off. The one element that's never, ever talked about in this triumvirate of LBJ, organized crime, and CIA are Zionist elements. You're not allowed to say this. And I'll tell you this, if you are a professional assassination scholar, and you can make a living doing that. You can write books, you can be at conferences, you can do all kinds of stuff. If you dare to utter a word about this, you're out. Right. You're not going to make any money. Now, luckily, I don't make a living as a JFK assassination scholar, but you're not allowed to talk about this.